Mollusks are the second largest phylum next to arthropods, and the largest marine phylum. As you can see on this chart, the blue is arthropods, the purple is mollusks, and the green are chordates, which is what we are as humans. The mollusk phylum contains 8 classes, as well as 75,000 species. They can be found all over the world, including freshwater, saltwater, and land environments. They can even be found in Antarctica. They can come in small sizes like the Acmelanana, or large like the giant sea squid, from very simple to extremely intricate, and some are even alien-like. But what are mollusks? Hey guys, it's Ollie, welcome back to my YouTube channel. So let's talk about mollusks. Mollusks have always played a role for us humans. Some shells were used as currency, some produce pearls, Tyrium purple was made from the mucus of murex snails, and of course, mollusks make up a large food source for us, and they are more than likely among the earliest organisms on Earth, probably evolving from primitive flatworms. I am interrupting here to let you guys know that this is a very simplified version of Mollusks 101. In this video, I do plan on touching what is like a mollusk, like what classifies a mollusk, and the 8 classes very briefly. If I do any more in depth than I have, this video would go on and on and on. So to give justice to these creatures, I am planning on making individual videos for each class. These will be spread out over time, but this is more of a preface to really understand what mollusks are as a whole. Now that that is out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into it. So what is a mollusk, like definition-wise? They are typically described as soft-body invertebrates that lack a skeleton or an exoskeleton. Mollusks do vary quite a bit, but the main characteristics include a muscular foot used for movement or digging, a visceral mask that contains the organs, an external or internal shell, usually made from calcium, a mantle that secretes a substance that hardens the shell, a radula used for scraping up and grinding food, and the structure of a nervous system. There are 3 classes that you will more than likely know about. These include gastropods, bivalves, and cephalopods. But I want to go through the ones that you really don't hear about. So I decided to kind of go in an order from what I consider least complex to most complex. Starting out with Caudophoviata. This is a deep sea mollusk consisting of around 141 species. They are very worm-like in appearance, and their size ranges from 0.2 to 10 centimeters. Although the Chiotodura felduri has gotten as big as 36 centimeters. They have no foot and no shell. Instead of a shell, their skin is covered with a sturdy outer layer called the cuticula, as well as sclerites, which are spines that cover the skin made of calcium. They are also deposit feeders that live a burrowing lifestyle, keeping their gills at the top of their burrow. And they have a radula, though it is a primitive radula that grows from the esophagus wall. They also do have a simple nervous system. Caudophoviata also reproduce sexually. They have distinct males and females, and likely fertilize outside of the body. All of these species used to be under a different class called Aplycophora, along with our next mollusk, Solengastries. They have of course since been separated into their own classes. So let's go ahead and switch over to that mollusk, Solengastries. These are another worm-like mollusk consisting of about 300 species. They measure in at about 1 inch or less. They have no shell, and they have a narrow, short, and rudimentary foot. They're blind and spend most of their time crawling around on the ocean floor or corals in search of food. When they do find food, they use their radula to grab it and swallow it whole. Other species will puncture the skin and suck out the cell fluids. And just like before, replacing the shell is the cuticula, reinforced with sclerites. Solengastries usually live on corals, and can even produce a mucus to help aid in movement. They also change their sex with age, the younger ones being males that will become females later in life. And they have internal fertilization. Now let's move on to our next class. This is Polyplacophora, better known as chitons. Chitons are marine mollusks made up of about 750 species. They vary in size from 0.5 to 5 centimeters, one species reaching about 30 centimeters in length. And you may notice they look pretty different from the other mollusks on this list. Unlike the last 2, they do have shells. These shells are made up of 8 overlapping valves bordered by a thick girdle formed from the mantle. The foot is surrounded by the pallial cavity and is used almost as a suction cup to cling onto hard surfaces. They also do have a simple nervous system and many special minute sensory organs known as esthetes that pass through the shell valves, some of which are specialized light receptors, having a minute lens and a retina-like structure. They do have a head, although they lack tentacles and eyes. They also have a radula, which they use to scrape up food from the seafloor. The majority of chitons have separate sexes and usually fertilize externally. And now on to our fourth mollusk. This is the Monoplacophora. Monoplacophora are an odd little bunch. They are made up of about 20 known living species, all of which live in deep waters ranging from 174 to 6,500 meters. And up until 1952, we actually had no living specimen of this mollusk, although we had their fossils from the Paleozoic era long before this, but we thought that they were extinct. The reason for this is simply the depth they are found in. Since they do live so deep in the water, it's very easy for them to avoid human interaction, so it's no wonder that we thought that they were extinct for so long. These prehistoric mollusks are very unusual. They have a poorly defined head, no eyes or tentacles, but they do have an elaborate radula. Each row of this radula has a central tooth, 3 pairs of lateral teeth, and 2 pairs of marginal teeth. They have a single rounded foot used for movement, a single cap-like shell, and do have separate sexes. And they more than likely fertilize externally, although we can't be sure about that. I do want to save a lot of the nitty-gritty on this one for another video, so that is all I'm going to cover for that today. That being said, let's move on to the next mollusk, which besides snails are my favorite mollusk. This is the class Scaphopoda. They are also known as the tusk shell, which you can see why. There are roughly 900 species of tusk shells, all of which are marine, and they are found from shallow waters to waters as low as 4,500 meters deep. Most of them are roughly 3 to 6 centimeters, but can be around 4 millimeters to 15 centimeters. But looks aren't the only weird thing about tusk shells. Their functionality is also pretty weird. It looks like, as you've seen, a tusk. This tusk is the shell, and it actually opens at both ends. The head and foot extend through the ventral aperture, which is the wider end of the shell. That head has tentacles, which are used to detect and catch prey. They also have a long pointed foot, which is referred to as a shovel foot. And as the name implies, they use this for digging and burrowing. This mollusk does stay burrowed most of the time, leaving the tip of the tusk exposed, or at least towards the top. They also lack eyes and have no gills. Instead, they absorb oxygen from the water straight through their mantle. And as for their tentacles, they do have a lot of minute tentacles, which again is capticula. They use these to thrift through the substrate in search of food. They also have a large radula used for breaking up this food. This radula is the largest organ compared to body size out of any of the mollusks. And just like a lot of them on this list, they do have distinct sexes, and they do fertilize externally. And honestly, I could talk about these little weirdos all day, but I don't want this video to be super long, so let's go ahead and move on. We are officially at the 3 mollusks you are probably going to recognize. Let's start off with bivalves, or bivalvia if you want to be fancy. Examples include oysters, clams, and scallops. They have 2 shells called valves that hinge together. They range in size from 1 millimeter all the way up to the giant clam at 137 centimeters. Bivalves are very unique in the fact that they do lack a head and a radula, instead being filter feeders. They also have a very strong retractable foot. Some species use it to stay on hard rocks, on wave-swept shores. Some will use it to swim a little bit, some will use it to move around on the substrate, and some to dig. Some bivalves also have primitive eyes, usually around the outer rim of the shell. Most of the characteristics of bivalves heavily depend on the species. Depending on species, some bivalves have distinct sexes while others change their sex during the course of their life. And some are always both, but they all do fertilize externally. There's a lot of meat to this topic, and it does get complicated really fast, and I'm so sorry that it's so short, but we are going to go ahead and move on until they get their own video. So let's go on to our next mollusk that I know all of you know, the gastropod. Gastropods are one of the most diverse classes of mollusk, and by far the largest, with over 40,000 species, which makes up about 80% of all mollusks. They can be found in marine environments, freshwater environments, and on land. Some living in extreme depths and some living in trees. If you've ever been outside, you have probably seen a gastropod. The examples of gastropods are snails, slugs, and semi-slugs. If you want to know the difference between those three, I do already have a video I'll be putting in one of these corners. Their sizes can range all the way from 1 millimeter to 20 centimeters. Gastropods will have a single shell, either external or internal. Some of them don't have a shell at all. They have a broad, flat, muscular foot that they use for movement, grasping, and digging. They also have a head with simple eyes, but pretty poor eyesight, a radula to rasp and grind food, and tentacles that act as scent receptors. Many gastropods can actually retract their foot into their shell, even blocking off the entrance to their shell. The marine ones do usually have gills and siphons, and of course their shell has a mantle and a little pocket with all their organs. Gastropod reproduction is extremely diverse. Most will have internal fertilization, but some will have external. Some species also have distinct sexes, while others do not. And again, it's time to move on. I know that I am speeding through these, but this is a preface for my other videos where I will be talking all about them. By the way, I am doing a thing with anatomy of snails. If you are interested in that, stick around. I do also do a lot of snail content and gastropod content, so if you really like gastropods, this is the channel for you. Anyway, let's move on to cephalopods, which is most people's favorite. Cephalopods are among the most well-known, largest, and intelligent mollusk, although not many people know that they are mollusks. They are strictly marine, living in all oceans, made up of about 700 species. Examples include the octopus, squid, and cuttlefish. Almost all cephalopods are predatory and have at least 8 arms derived from a foot for movement and grasping. And they do have a radula. It sits inside of their parrot-like beak and is used for subduing prey. Their mantle is modified into a siphon that they use for movement via jet propulsion. And they have highly developed nervous and sensory systems. These include complex eyes and a centralized brain instead of ganglia like most mollusks have. Ganglia basically being a primitive brain, but of course the definition's on the screen. But most of them only have an internal shell, except for the nautilus. That one is special. Nautilus are the only cephalopods to have an external shell. Instead of relying on a shell for protection, they can actually produce a cloud of ink, which they use to confuse and escape their predators. And some of them can even camouflage on command. Reproduction is probably where they differ the most from the other classes of mollusk. They have separate distinct sexes, and mating usually involves a courtship, and this courtship usually involves some elaborate color changes. And they do usually fertilize internally, but of course depending on the species. In my opinion, they are definitely the most unique of the gastropod classes. And that concludes our 8 classes of mollusks. There is so much to learn and talk about when it comes to these creatures that I just couldn't cram it into one video. There's just too much information in that. So let me know which of the individual class videos you would like to see first. And of course, help me out by giving this video a like for the algorithm. All of my links, including my Instagram account, my art Instagram account, my Facebook group, my wife and I's Etsy, and most importantly, all of the sources I used in today's video, including imagery sources, will be in the description down below. And of course, subscribe to this channel if you are into this kind of content or really any animal kind of content. I upload every single Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, but you can hit the bell if you don't want to remember that. And as always, I'll see you guys next week. Bye.